My name is Mara Ellison, and I've worked the night shift in the emergency department at St. Bridget's in Cincinnati for 17 years. I've stood in trauma bays splattered with blood, held pressure on wounds no human body should have survived, and written time of death on patients whose names I never learned. Nights like that leave a mark, yes, but they make sense. There's a reason behind the pain. Physics, biology, bad decisions, bad luck. What I'm about to tell you doesn't fit in any chart I've ever written. It was just after 1 a.m. when the call came over the intercom. Pediatric incoming. ETA 2 minutes. Collapse, possible seizure. Stable vitals on scene. The words froze me mid-chart, my pen hovering above a page half filled with shorthand notes. Pediatric. Collapse. 2 minutes. No matter how many years you work in the ER, those words punch through like ice water to the chest. Adults are one thing. You can prepare yourself for heart attacks, for wrecks, for the kinds of injuries that come from living long enough to make mistakes. Children, though, children collapse for reasons you can't always see, reasons that sometimes defy reason itself. By the time I reached Trauma 3, the paramedics were wheeling her in. A little girl, maybe 8 years old. Her small body wrapped in a quilt that looked handmade, bright patches faded from too many washes. She had dark hair clinging damp to her forehead, eyes half-lidded but open, scanning the room as though she'd never been here before, yet somehow knew what she was looking for. Her grandparents were with her. The grandmother clutched her purse in both hands like it was a lifeline. Lips moving without sound. A rhythm I recognized as prayer, even though no words carried. The grandfather's hand stayed on the bed rail, knuckles white, shoulders stooped under a weight that wasn't just years. The paramedic rattled off the report. 8 years old. Found unresponsive in the living room, brief tonic activity, confused afterward. Pupils equal and reactive, sugar 90, oxygen SATs 99% on room air. Vitals stable during transport, no meds at home. He paused, leaned closer, voice lower. She kept looking at the corner like someone was there. I didn't answer. I've heard odd details from medics before. Patients reaching for invisible objects, muttering nonsense, calling names that aren't in the room. The brain does strange things under stress. But the way he said it, the glance he gave to the girl, made my skin prickle. I moved to her side, clipped the pulse ox to her finger, and waited for the little red glow. The number came back steady, 98%. Her heart was fast but not alarming. Respiration a touch shallow, but even. On paper, she was stable. But her eyes didn't look at me, or at her grandparents, or at the ceiling. They locked hard to the far corner of the trauma bay, the one where the walls met the ceiling in a shadow the light never fully erased. "Sweetheart, my name's Mara," I told her, my hand brushing the quilt as I adjusted the IV start kit. "Can you tell me your name?" Her lips parted. Her voice was soft, deliberate, like she was testing whether it would carry. "Lily." The grandmother exhaled a sob at the sound. "She's our Lily." I smiled for her, though my chest felt tight. "That's a beautiful name. You're safe here, Lily. We're going to take care of you." But Lily didn't answer me. Her gaze was fixed, her pupils widening just slightly as though something invisible had caught her attention. Then, with a small tilt of her head toward the corner, she whispered, "He's here." The words were so faint I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard them, but her lips had moved, and I knew better. "Who's here, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even as a chill crept up my arms. She didn't look at me, didn't blink. She just kept staring into that shadow where the walls joined, as though it mattered more than anything happening around her. Her grandparents exchanged a glance. The grandmother murmured, She talks sometimes, about people we don't see. About her parents. They passed when she was a baby. I felt the floor shift under those words. Parents gone, raised by grandparents. A child shaped by absence. Sometimes grief echoes through generations. Sometimes it finds its way into the mouths of children. But I couldn't shake the weight of her whisper. I moved through the motions, temperature, neurocheck, listening to lungs, heart sounds. Everything was as normal as could be, except her focus. Every time I leaned in, her eyes flicked back to the corner like it held her tethered. When I started the IV, her fingers twitched against mine, and she whispered again. "He doesn't like the lights." The words were clearer this time, not delirious, not confused. A statement. I glanced at the fluorescent tubes above us, buzzing faintly, their light harsh against pale skin and steel. The shadow in the corner held, deeper than it should have been. I looked back to her, but she was already staring there again, transfixed. Her grandparents shifted closer. The grandfather's voice cracked as he tried to smile. "She's a brave one, always has been." But his hand trembled against the bed rail, and I knew he felt it too. The heaviness in the room, the sense that something else had arrived with her, something waiting just beyond what the eye could name. That was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be like other nights. We wheeled Lily down the corridor toward CT, her quilt tucked carefully around her, IV line bouncing with the rattle of the stretcher wheels. I walked beside her, hand resting lightly on the bed rail. Not because it needed me, but because I needed the contact. The fluorescent ceiling lights hummed as we moved beneath them, a rhythm so steady it almost lulled the senses, until one flickered violently overhead and buzzed louder, like a fly caught inside a lamp. The transport tech muttered, "These lights, man, always when you least want it." But when I glanced at him, his face was pale and his jaw tight. He'd felt it too. Inside the CT suite, the air was colder, the light harsher, stripped of warmth. The machine's ring glowed, waiting to swallow the child whole. The tech spoke soft reassurances as he fitted the foam cushions around her head. Lily stared up, quiet as a statue, her eyes reflecting the sterile glow. When the table began to glide her inward, she tilted her chin slightly toward me. "He got here first," she whispered. The words cut so sharply that I stopped moving, my hand frozen over the IV line. "Who, Lily?" She didn't answer. Her lips stilled, her gaze locked somewhere above, into the machine's hollow circle. The scanner hummed to life, and in the sterile wash of noise, the words she'd just spoken repeated inside me like an echo chamber. "He got here first." The scan finished without incident. Images uploaded clean. No bleed, no mass, no shift. The radiologist's voice through the intercom was brisk. "Looks clear. We'll want neurology, maybe EEG, but nothing acute. Nothing acute, nothing visible." Yet the air still pressed against me like invisible hands. We wheeled her back toward Trauma 3. As we rolled past the waiting room, I caught the grandparents in my peripheral vision, sitting rigid in the stiff plastic chairs, hands clasped together so tightly their knuckles glowed white. They rose immediately when they saw her, following us down the hall in silence. Back in Trauma 3, Lily's vitals were steady. The monitor beamed normalcy, its green numbers bright against the dark. But when I bent close to check her pupils again, I noticed her lips had gone faintly bluish, her skin shading dusky at the edges. The oxygen saturation still read 99%. The numbers smiled, but the child's body told another story. "She's not perfusing right," I muttered, half to myself. The attending, Ortega, stepped in, glanced at the monitor, then at Lily. "Numbers are fine," he said, tone clipped, professional. "Look at her lips," I pressed, pointing. He frowned, leaned in, and for the briefest moment, doubt clouded his eyes. Then he shook his head. "Let's keep an eye. She may just be cold." Cold. That wasn't it. I could feel the air growing colder, too. Not the chill of air conditioning, but something denser, heavier, a pressure that filled corners and pressed into lungs. The grandmother's humming began softly again, an old tune, wordless, trembling. The grandfather tugged the brim of his cap, staring hard at the corner of the room. Lily's eyes slid open, glassy, but deliberate. She fixed on me, her small hand twitching beneath the quilt. "He doesn't like the lights," she repeated, louder this time, her gaze darting toward the fluorescent tube above us. At that moment, the light flickered again. 2 sharp bursts, then a faint sizzle like wires burning. The smell followed seconds later, metallic, acrid, like the taste of pennies on the tongue. I froze, bile rising in my throat. The monitor beeped an occlusion alarm. I checked the line. Perfectly patent. Then, without anyone touching it, the alarm cleared itself. The green numbers reappeared, steady, smug. The grandfather swore softly under his breath. Lord help us. I turned back to Lily. Her eyes were still fixed on the corner. I followed her gaze. Nothing, just a wall, a seam of paint, a shadow. And yet the shadow seemed too deep, too dark, for the angle of the light. I forced myself to move, to ground the moment in medicine. I adjusted the oxygen, flushed the line, prepared to draw another set of labs. But inside, I felt it. The sense that we weren't alone in that room, that something had indeed gotten here first. And Lily knew it. She whispered again, softer now, her breath fogging against the cannula. He says not to be afraid. Her grandmother's hum faltered, broke, then steadied again, higher pitched, sharper, like she was singing against something pressing close. Dr. Ortega gave me a look, clinical, skeptical, but uneasy too. Hallucinations, he muttered. Kids see things. Maybe. Or maybe kids see more than we can bear to believe. Back in Trauma 3, the room felt smaller than before, as if the walls had inched closer during the walk from court. The fluorescent tube overhead had steadied, but I didn't trust its glow anymore. The air still carried that faint metallic tang, a smell that didn't belong in a hospital unless something had gone very wrong with the wiring. I could see Ortega shake his head, jotting a note on his chart, choosing to ignore what the rest of us were breathing in. Numbers on a page were safer than shadows in a room. Lily's grandmother had taken a seat now, still humming, still holding her purse tight against her chest like it might shield them all. Her grandfather stood at the foot of the bed, turning his cap round and round in his hands, his eyes darting between the monitors and the corner of the room. He'd stopped looking at me. He was looking at something I couldn't see. Lily stirred under the quilt. Her lips were pale, cracked slightly, but her eyes were clear. Too clear. Children don't look at you that way unless they're seeing more than you want them to. She swallowed, her voice soft but deliberate. He wants to help. I crouched down so my eyes were level with hers. Who does? Sweetheart? Her gaze flicked to the ceiling corner again, then back to me. The one with the wings. The grandfather made a choked sound, half laugh, half sob, like he wanted to dismiss it but couldn't. His hands fumbled with the brim of the cap until it slipped from his fingers and landed on the floor with a flat thud. Before I could ask, Lily's eyes shifted and her tone changed. The whisper now was sharper, urgent. The other one doesn't. The grandmother froze, her hum silenced mid-note. The grandfather stooped to grab his cap, but his hand shook so badly he missed it twice. I felt the back of my neck prickle. There's another one? I asked carefully. Lily nodded. He tries the doors. He doesn't like the lights, but the one with wings, he keeps him out. The words landed in me with a weight I couldn't shake. I wanted to explain it away. Hallucination, dream fragments, fever, but her temperature was normal. Labs hadn't hinted at infection, and her voice wasn't delirious. It was certain. Her grandfather finally managed to pick up the cap. He stared at it in his hands, thumb running along the bent brim. The broken hat, Lily said suddenly, pointing. The man's face drained of color. His eyes filled in an instant. Lord God, he whispered, the cap clutched like a relic. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to explain. I'd seen enough family photos on bedside tables to know. The young man in the bent ball cap, the boy who died on a winter road, was Lily's father. Her grandmother's hand flew to her mouth. She can't. She doesn't. The words dissolved into a sob. Lily's chest rose and fell steadily, but her pupils dilated, swallowing the brown into black. She blinked slowly, as if the weight of the room pressed against her small body. He's here, she said again, this time not frightened, not even surprised, just matter of fact. At that moment the monitor beeped, not the irregular alarm of low oxygen or arrhythmia, but a false occlusion. I checked the IV. Perfect. The line was clear, dripping steadily. The machine cleared itself with a chirp, the green numbers flashing back into view. But Lily's lips were turning blue again. "That's fine," Ortega said, frowning at the screen. "No," I snapped, pointing at her mouth. "Look at her. She's not perfusing." He leaned close, finally pressing his fingers to her pulse. His frown deepened. Damn it. The machine beeped again, still steady, still smiling, while her skin shaded dusky. I pressed a hand to her sternum, feeling the faint flutter of her heart, weaker than the screen suggested. The monitor was lying to us, or something was making it lie. The grandmother's hum returned, shakier now, rising like a shield between the child and the heavy air pressing in. The grandfather clutched the cap to his chest, whispering words I couldn't hear, maybe prayer, maybe memory. Lily's eyes fluttered, then snapped wide open. She looked at me with a focus so sharp it pierced me. "Don't let him in." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the overhead light flickered hard enough that the bulb popped, showering faint sparks into the metal casing. The smell of pennies swelled again, sharper, as if something invisible had dragged its nails through the copper veins of the hospital walls. And in that moment, I knew with every part of me, this wasn't just a sick child, this was a battle. She was caught between two presences, one that carried wings, one that wanted the door. And I was standing at the threshold. The room had changed. You wouldn't know it if you looked at a chart, or at the neat printouts from the labs, or even at the CT scan glowing harmlessly on the screen in radiology. But standing inside Trauma 3, I could feel it. The air pressed closer. The light from the overhead tube felt strained, fighting to hold itself steady. It was as if someone had slipped a veil over everything ordinary. And now we were moving inside a different kind of space. Thicker, charged, watchful. Lily stirred beneath the quilt. Her breathing was shallow, uneven, and though the oxygen line whispered its flow, her lips still carried that troubling shade of blue. I leaned close, trying to ground myself in medicine. Perfusion, circulation, gas exchange. I've spent most of my life trusting numbers. But in that moment, the body in front of me was telling the truth. The machines refused to admit. Her eyelids flickered open. The eyes beneath them weren't frantic or confused, the way postictal children's usually are. They were steady. Too steady. She fixed them on me and spoke with the careful clarity of someone relaying a message. "He wants to help," she said softly. My throat tightened. "Who, Lily?" Her gaze shifted to the corner of the ceiling where the shadow pulled thicker than it should. Then she looked back at me, her small face deadly serious. "The one with the wings." The words slid into me like cold water, filling the space between my ribs. Her grandfather made a strangled noise, like a laugh cracked in half, and the cap slipped from his hands to the floor. The grandmother clutched her purse tighter, whispering prayers beneath her breath. I bent closer, keeping my voice steady, gentle. "And who else, sweetheart?" Her gaze dropped, the certainty in it shuddering like glass about to crack. "The other one doesn't. He tries the doors." The grandmother stopped humming, her silence heavier than sound. The grandfather bent, shaking, to pick up his cap, but his fingers fumbled twice before he finally managed it. His thumb traced the bent brim, and in that moment Lily's eyes sharpened with recognition. "The broken hat," she whispered, pointing. I saw the man's face collapse. Tears welled fast and spilled. He clutched the cap to his chest like a relic. His lips moved soundlessly, but I knew the name he was saying, the one I'd seen in old photographs on a bedside table long ago. The young man in the bent ball cap, smiling wide, holding a baby girl who would never remember him. Her father. The grandmother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "She can't know that," she choked. "She was too little. She never saw." But Lily wasn't looking at them. She was staring at me. "He's here," she said again, firmer now. Not a wish, a declaration. The monitor beeped an occlusion alarm. I checked the IV, perfect. No kink, no clot. Before I could reset it, the alarm cleared itself, numbers flashing back steady and smug. But Lily's lips were darker now, her skin faintly dusky, her breaths shallow. The machine lied, bold-faced, while the body in front of me whispered the truth. "She's not perfusing," I muttered. Ortega frowned at the screen. "Looks fine." "Look at her," I snapped, sharper than I meant. He touched her wrist, pressed his fingers to her carotid. His frown deepened. "Damn it." He turned to order a bolus, but I barely heard him, because Lily's eyes were open again, pupils wide, her voice urgent now, trembling. "Don't let him in." The fluorescent light above us sputtered and popped. A faint spark snapped in the metal casing, and the room filled with that metallic odor again, sharp and acrid, like copper pennies pressed against the tongue. The grandmother's hum returned suddenly, frantic, an old tune pitched high and trembling. The grandfather held his cap like a weapon, pressing it against his chest with both hands. I watched them and realized they weren't just praying, they were shielding. Lily's lips moved again. "He keeps him out," she said softly, nodding toward the corner. "But he can't hold forever." A chill rippled over me. It was the way she said it. Calm, as if she were describing weather patterns or how long a battery might last. Not panicked, not delirious. Certain. I forced myself to keep working. I adjusted the oxygen, reset the monitor, flushed the line. But my hands felt foreign. Heavy, as though I were moving through water. I kept glancing at the door, the seams of it, the hinges. The ER is built on doors. Who can pass? Who cannot? We protect those lines like lifelines. And suddenly the thought came, unbidden and sharp. What if the door itself was the line being tested? I tried to steady myself with the training that had always anchored me. Patterns, symptoms, causes. The art of medicine is recognizing what others miss. I've always trusted that. But now the patterns blurred. The cause wasn't inside her blood, or her brain, or her lungs. It was pressing at the threshold. I thought of my grandmother then, her voice soft in a dark kitchen when I was small. She used to say children were closest to the veil, that angels and demons fought hardest for them because innocence was a prize. I'd laughed it off as superstition. I built a life on medicine, on things you could measure, chart, explain. But now, staring at the corner of Trauma 3, I wondered if she had known something I had forgotten. The monitor beeped again. This time, it showed a normal rhythm, even as Lily's chest heaved shallow and irregular. I pressed my fingers to her sternum, feeling her small heart flutter like a trapped bird. The machine said she was fine. Her body said she wasn't. The grandmother's hum rose higher, the tune breaking into tremors. The grandfather's lips moved faster, words spilling into the air like a river. He wasn't praying for medicine. He was praying for mercy. Then Lily arched suddenly, her back lifting from the bed, her eyes rolled upward, her lips shaping words without sound. I bent close, desperate, and heard them in the hollow between us. "He likes stores." The words chilled me more than anything she had said yet. I looked at the trauma bay door, its metal frame gleaming under the light. For the first time in my life, I thought of a door not as an object, but as an invitation. The hinge sighed. No one touched it. The sound was tired, heavy, the sound a door makes when someone leans against it from the other side. My skin prickled with sweat. I turned back to her. "Lily," I whispered, though my throat was dry. "Who is he?" Her gaze sharpened, impossibly old for her 8 years. "The one who doesn't want to help." The fluorescent light flickered again, then steadied. The metallic odor swelled, clinging to the back of my throat. The IV pump shrieked with an occlusion alarm, then cleared itself without anyone moving. The monitor blinked nonsense numbers, then corrected, smug again. The other nurse in the room made a strangled sound, backing away. "What the hell is happening tonight?" Ortega barked for labs, his voice too loud, trying to anchor himself in protocol, but I barely heard him. Because I could feel it. The room was no longer just a room. It was a battleground. The child was the field. The one with wings was fighting to hold the line. And the other, the one who liked doors, was pressing against the threshold. I stood at her side, hand still against her chest, and realized with a clarity that turned my stomach, I wasn't just her nurse tonight. I was the door. I thought of all the trauma bays I'd worked in, all the bodies that had passed through, all the lives we had pulled back from the edge. I thought of how many times I'd been told I was the steady one, the calm in the storm. Tonight, that steadiness felt like more than a trait. It felt like a calling. But steadiness doesn't keep shadows from seeping. The hinge sighed again, louder this time. The door rattled once, then stilled. Lily's eyes snapped to it. "He's close," she whispered. Her fingers clutched at mine with sudden strength. "Don't let him in." The grandmother's voice broke into sobs mid-hum. The grandfather dropped to his knees at the foot of the bed, cap clutched to his chest, whispering his son's name over and over like a plea. I stared at the door, my pulse hammering, and for the first time in my career, I felt that what we were holding back wasn't death or disease or fate. It was something else entirely, something that wanted in, and I didn't know if we could keep it out. The door sighed again, longer this time, louder, a drawn-out groan of hinges shifting under weight. Every head in the room snapped toward it. Ortega, the other nurse, the grandparents. We all heard it now. For a heartbeat, the air stilled, pressing against us like a held breath. Then the rattle came. Sharp, insistent, like fists hammering against steel, though no fists were visible. The glass pane quivered in its frame. Lily arched, suddenly on the bed, her back lifting clean off the mattress, IV tubing straining taut. The monitor showed a steady rhythm, perfect oxygenation, numbers too normal, too cheerful, as though mocking us. But her lips darkened to purple, her chest heaved with shallow gasps, her pulse fluttered weakly against my fingers. The machine lied, the body screamed. "She's crashing!" I shouted, though my voice cracked. Ortega rushed to the head of the bed, barking orders. Bag her, push fluids, draw another set of labs, but his words broke against the sounds building around us. The monitor beeped erratically, alarms layering over one another in nonsense cadences, like voices speaking in tongues. The overhead light flickered, flared, then dimmed, throwing the room into half shadow. The grandmother's hum faltered, then rose again, louder, trembling. The grandfather knelt at the foot of the bed, clutching his cap like a talisman, his voice breaking in prayer. I pressed my palm against Lily's chest, feeling the faint flutter of her heart through her thin sternum. Her eyes flew open, pupils wide, and her lips shaped the words again. "Don't let him in." The door shuddered violently, glass rattling like it would splinter. A shadow stretched under the frame, dark rivulets sliding across the tile toward the bed. It didn't move like light or like smoke. It moved with intent. The other nurse screamed, stumbling backward, nearly toppling the tray of supplies. Ortega froze, hands hovering over the airway kit, his eyes wide and glassy. He whispered, almost to himself, "What the hell is this?" Lily convulsed again, her arms flung wide, IV line nearly tearing loose. I pinned it with one hand while holding her chest with the other, torn between medicine and instinct. "Stay with me, Lily," I whispered. "Stay." Her lips moved beneath the oxygen mask, voice faint, broken. "He's almost in." The room pulsed with pressure, a vibration you could feel in your teeth, in your bones. The shadow on the floor lengthened, reaching toward the bed. I wanted to scream at Ortega, at the nurse, at anyone. "Do you see it?" But the words died in my throat. Then another shift came, sudden, sharp. The air cleared for a moment, a draft sweeping across us, carrying the faintest scent of something clean, like lilies in bloom, like rain striking hot pavement. The shadow recoiled slightly, and Lily's body eased against the mattress, chest rising in a shallow but steady breath. "He's here," she whispered again, softer this time but not afraid. "With wings." The grandfather sobbed openly, clutching his cap to his chest as though it were his son's hand. The grandmother's hum rose higher, steadier, an old hymn now shaped into defiance. The door rattled one final time, harder than before. The glass trembled, spiderweb cracks forming across its surface. Ortega reached instinctively toward it, then stopped, hand frozen midair as though he'd touched something colder than ice. His face drained of color. Lily cried out, her voice breaking into a silent scream, mouth wide, eyes wild. Her heart fluttered wildly under my palm, skipping beats, stuttering. The monitor still showed perfection, a mockery of truth. I leaned over her, my lips close to her ear. "You're not alone," I whispered, not sure who I was speaking to, her father, whatever held the line. The pressure in the room shifted again. The lights flared, steady and bright. The shadow under the door shrank, pulling back, retreating into nothingness. The glass pane stilled, cracks holding but not spreading. The beeping monitors cleared themselves, displaying normal numbers, smug and steady. Lily's chest rose and fell in even rhythm. Her lips pinked faintly, her pulse stronger beneath my hand. Her eyes fluttered open, calm now, and she smiled faintly. "He says it's okay," she murmured, before drifting into sleep. The room fell into silence, heavy but clean. The grandmother's hum softened, fading into a quiet sob. The grandfather leaned his forehead against the bed rail, clutching the cap with trembling hands. Ortega stepped back, his face pale, his mouth working silently. The other nurse pressed herself against the wall, shaking. I stood frozen at the bedside, my hand still on Lily's chest, heart hammering against my ribs. The air smelled of saline and alcohol again. Normal. Clean. But the cracks in the glass pane held, proof of a weight that no chart could ever explain. We had survived the breaking point. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like reprieve. Because the door was still there, and doors always open again. The quiet after the storm felt wrong. It wasn't the clean silence that follows a successful code, when the adrenaline burns off and everyone exhales together. It was the silence of a room that had just held its breath against something unspeakable, and wasn't yet sure if it was gone. Lily lay still, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, the pink back in her lips. The monitor now sang its familiar lullaby of numbers and lines, each value marching obediently across the screen. The IV pump purred as though it had never shrieked lies. To anyone walking in, it would look like a child recovering from a seizure, stable, monitored, safe. But to those of us who had been inside the storm, it was a different room. The grandmother sat, hunched in the corner chair, face buried in her hands, shoulders heaving with silent sobs. The grandfather stood like a sentinel at the foot of the bed, his son's cap pressed to his chest, eyes swollen but unblinking, staring at Lily as if she might vanish the moment he looked away. The other nurse busied herself with supplies, the tremor in her hands betraying every effort to appear calm. Ortega paced once, then stopped, staring at the cracked glass pane in the door, his lips pressed into a tight, bloodless line. I stayed at Lily's side. I couldn't leave, not because she needed me. Her vitals were stable, the labs pending, but because I felt that my hand resting lightly against her small arm was the last tether holding her to this world. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time had lost its usual rhythm. Then Lily stirred, her eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. She looked up at me, then past me, to that same ceiling corner she'd been watching all night. Her lips curved into a small, peaceful smile. "He says he's proud of me," she whispered. The grandmother sobbed louder, rising to clasp her hands over Lily's. The grandfather closed his eyes, whispering his son's name like a prayer answered at last. Ortega turned his face away, muttering something about EEG follow-up, though his voice wavered. I swallowed hard. "Who says that, Lily?" I asked softly, though I already knew. She tilted her head toward the corner. "The one with wings." Her eyes closed again, her breathing even, her body slack with the ease of deep sleep. The grandmother brushed the damp hair from her forehead. "She's safe now," she said, as if saying it aloud would seal the truth. We kept Lily overnight for observation. Her labs trickled back one by one, all within normal ranges. The EEG in the morning was unremarkable. The pediatric neurologist shrugged in that helpless way I've seen too many times. Children seize, sometimes without reason. We watch. We wait. By afternoon, Lily was walking the halls with her grandparents, quilt draped around her shoulders, her small hand clutched tightly in her grandfather's. She looked tired but bright, her smile soft, her eyes lighter than I'd seen them in the trauma bay. At the threshold of Trauma 3, she paused. She looked back, not at me, not at her grandparents, but at the corner. She lifted her hand, as if waving goodbye to someone I couldn't see. Then she turned and walked away. To the staff, it was a case resolved, a child discharged, a family reunited. I charted the vitals, the interventions, the stable outcome. I didn't chart the whispers, the shadow under the door, the cracks in the glass. I didn't write that the monitor had lied, or that I'd felt pressure in the room like a storm waiting to break. Those truths don't belong in patient records. They belong only in memory. That night, after my shift, I stood outside in the hospital parking lot, the dawn creeping pale across the Cincinnati skyline. I thought of Lily's words, the smile she'd given the corner, the way her grandparents had clung to her, as though they'd been given back not just a granddaughter, but a son. I thought of the smell of pennies, the rattle of the door, the shadow stretching across the floor. I thought of the winged presence holding the line. But most of all, I thought of the other one, the one who liked doors. Because the weight had lifted, yes, the air felt cleaner, the light steadier, the room ordinary again. Lily was safe, at least for now. Her father, or something wearing his shape, had protected her, but something else had pressed against the door. And doors, I knew, do not forget. On my next shift, Trauma 3 stood empty, freshly cleaned, smelling of bleach and lemon polish. The glass pane in the door had been replaced. I told myself it was coincidence, just routine maintenance. Still, as I passed by, the hinge gave its tired sigh, though no one touched it. I froze, looked at the corner. Nothing, just paint and shadow. But I knew. The case will always remind me that the ER is not just a place of medicine, it is a threshold. And thresholds invite what waits on the other side. That night, something had been kept out, but not destroyed. And I can't shake the fear that what pressed so hungrily against the door is still wandering the halls, searching for another crack, another hinge, another child staring at a corner. And the question that haunts me most is not what it was, it's who it will find next.